In this video, we'll discuss the facial features on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s face that point to a purpose-driven nature and a balance between feeling joy and sadness in his life. Enjoy. Hey there, good people. Welcome back to my face reading channel. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Happy to have you here. But if you are new to the channel and you've never seen a face reading, I strongly encourage you to go up here and watch the 5-minute crash course face reading video. That will give you terms and terminology, and it's very important to understand what face reading is and what it isn't. Okay, but in a nutshell, face reading is a branch of Chinese medicine. It's used to ascertain personal aptitudes, personal strengths, personality structure, health rhythms. There's a lot that can be gathered from the face. So again, go watch that up here if you haven't already. Today, I'm going to stay on the presidential train, as I call it, because in the last few weeks, what I've done is 2 episodes ago for the celebrity face reading, quote unquote, I did sort of a breakdown of Trump and Biden debating, the key features that I noticed while they were debating. The week after that, which was last week, I did Donald Trump, and now I'm doing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. So people had asked for me to read him, and personally, I think he should have been on this stage. And I know we're a 2-party system, and we have all of the things all the reasons on why that can't happen. But given how poor Biden's performance was, I feel like RFK could have really provided some answers. A third person, a third perspective that would have been helpful. So he is also a controversial character. So, people that become president or that are aiming to be president, a lot of times are controversial. There are things that people like and don't like about a person. So again, with this, presidential candidate of sorts, I want to keep it neutral, and I'm going to talk about the things that I'm seeing. And I'm going to mention him in relation to the other 2 candidates that are being pushed here in America, because from a face reading perspective, okay, keeping a certain point of neutrality, he has the luckiest face out of these 3 candidates by far. So out of Trump, Biden, and RFK Jr., his features are auspicious, like through and through. And I went through and I kept thinking, I was like, wow, there's quite a bit here in terms of things that are favorable in face reading, especially in the context of politics and what he's doing. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump in to reading his face. First thing I notice with RFK is the Shen. He's got an interesting Shen. The Shen is the spirit, the anima, or the consciousness. It's how it comes out of the face and how it beams out. So he's got a mixture of sort of a water and wood energy. So the 5 elements can express through the face in a lot of different ways. But when we look at someone who's carrying a decent amount of water, there's a look of depth and knowing in the gaze. That means when they look at you, it looks like they're really tuning in, but there's also a depth to it. Now, he's got a decent amount of wood energy as well, too, because his gaze definitely is penetrating. So when a person's gaze penetrates, you want to think of it sort of like a battering ram, right? Like a log, like knocking a wall down in war. That's the wood energy. The water is a lot more steady, but it seeps into the ground and permeates everything. So both have a penetrating effect, but they do it a little bit differently. He's got a mixture of wood and water. So he's got a certain amount of depth to the gaze, the way the Shen comes out. And there's also a certain amount of directness where he's looking at you, and you can tell when he's tracking you or debating you or talking to you, there's definitely a penetrating energy. So the Shen was interesting to me. Now, going from the features, I'm going to go from the top down. His hairline. Okay, so he's got a receding M-shaped hairline. So there's a video you can go up here and watch on the M-shaped hairline, what that means. But when we talk about the M-shaped hairline, what we're looking at is a surplus of yin. Now, in his youth, I'll scan back here for a quick moment, he didn't have this, right? His hair was a little more flat and level, which is typical for people when they're younger. When we start to see this widow's peak forming, right, when the hair starts to go back, this is a surplus of yin. So yin is the receptive. In the yin-yang symbol, it's the black side. It's the receptive, watery, feminine, passive, quiet, cool, still energy of life. When this starts to happen and we start to see this receding, that means those metrics, the yin metrics in terms of subtlety, nuance, and understanding are starting to go up. Can this be expressed poorly or badly if the person's spirit or their Shen is bad? Sure. But you're just looking at an increase in the yin metrics. And personally, I think for, people going into the presidential sphere, having a certain amount of sensitivity, nuance, and refinement, especially in this political context, because things are so polarizing and so charged. It's very intense out there right now. And one of the things that I've noticed in listening to him talk a little bit, and with this yin hairline, follows suit to a certain degree. He's not willing to really bash either opponent. He's like, I'm not going to get into this game of name calling. I'm going to just talk about the issues that matter. I'm going to talk about where I agree and where I disagree, but he's not going to get into these personal attacks. So that's kind of interesting. And I think that yin, that's that soft edge. It's a soft edge approach to things, but also looking for the depth and the meaning rather than what's just on the surface and what's the low-hanging, easy fruit to grab. Now his forehead, all right, his forehead, he does have some connected forehead lines. And he's also got sort of this, the higher forehead is open and kind of still. Now, Biden's does this as well. He's got this blank spot on the forehead, and Biden's thought processes these days seem kind of that way. There's a blankness and a spaciness that goes with it. RFK does not present that well when he talks. He's got these lower connected forehead lines, but he's also got a nice, big, broad, open forehead. So when we see the connected forehead lines, that means cohesive thought. You have to keep in mind RFK Jr. was also a lawyer. He sued a lot of people, taken on some very, very big entities in the world, but he is cohesive. He's able to string his thoughts together and express his ideas pretty well. So we see that in the forehead. And that also means that when you have these lines, should you decide to go into a field where you're going to have to articulate your ideas, this is a good thing. This is the natural order of sort of nourishing life. Now, he's also got some of these lines right here, okay, what they call the 11s or the liver lines. So people, when they see these, I don't like it when people see these lines and they're immediately under the assumption that they're pathological. They're pathological when they are dominant to the point where it stands out and it's the only thing you can read in the face. These wrinkles fit with the congruency with the rest of his wrinkles on his face. They're not any louder than the rest of the wrinkles. And what that means is when we see that and it's not overly or excessively dominant, the person has grit, they have determination. And I assure you, him suing Monsanto and some of these big pharmaceutical companies and the environmental stuff that he's gone after, that takes a certain amount of grit and determination. So again, we see these lines and he's also had to fight pretty hard, tooth and nail, to be heard in this election, to do a lot of things in this world. He's had to definitely fight hard. Now, he's also got some really good joy lines, which I like to see. You know, he's got the best joy lines out of the presidents, out of the people that are running, Biden and Trump. So when he smiles, he gets these nice joy lines, which means there's a certain level of real, actual joy in what he's doing, whether you agree with his politics or not. The heart or the tone of the person is really enjoying what they're doing. You know, truth be told, Trump has these lines too. So you can sit there and be like, well, Trump has them and RFK have them, so, you know, they're the same person. No, what it means is the epicenter of the person, the soul, the consciousness is enjoying the process of what they're doing. So you can read that good or bad. So again, don't read features as being good or bad. You have to read them relative to the person. Now he's also got some of the lines that, what they call sadness lines. Okay, he's got these lines that go down here. Now I'm not going to do a deep dive into the Kennedy family history, but there has been a lot of death and assassination in the Kennedy family. This man has been through some grief and then some. Very real, hard, gnarly grief in his life, and it definitely shows up on his face. So we have to understand that wrinkles form over time as a result of emotional patterns that we engage, but you don't want to think, well, you know, he didn't have these sadness lines in his youth, and it's like, well, he just didn't have enough earth time to accumulate them. Some of us get these lines as we get older, and so what I do think there's a balance. When people have good joy lines, it's pretty reasonable that they're also going to have some sadness lines, because joy and sadness are kind of two sides of the same coin. They're the yin and yang. So they talk about this, they talk about like telomere length and things that help us age better. And one of the determining factors is how appropriately and how well and how often we laugh and we cry. You can't just laugh through life and be sarcastic and going through and missing everything and just, you know, everything is a sarcastic joke. And you can't be deadpan serious your entire life either. Both will compromise the integrity of the emotions and the heart and the body. So part of how we age well is just plenty of laughter and plenty of tears. And he's got a good balance of both. And I think that's relevant because you don't appreciate the joy if you don't really know what the darkness and the sadness is, and vice versa. So he's got some good lines there, which I like to see. Now, looking at his eyebrows, pretty dominant, especially in his youth. You know, they've gotten grayer and a little bit thinner as he's gotten older, but these are wood metrics. These are people who can push, who can fight and argue a point, of which RFK most definitely can. So interesting. Interesting wood metrics there. Now, in moving down his face, okay, he does have a good nose. Nothing that stands out and leaps out to me as the center of his face. It's not the thing that leaps out the most to me, but it is a strong nose, which is a midlife anchor, represents the 40s. So when we see a good nose, it's like a good center point. It's a good anchor. It makes sure that means the boat is not going to be moving around in tumultuous waters too much. So I like seeing that central anchor to his face. He's got really good purpose lines. All right. Now these lines, these nasolabial groove lines, sometimes you'll have people in their 70s and they're not well defined. And if I see those with a client, I always tell people there's more to do in terms of you finding how you really fit, the puzzle piece of you fitting into the world. His are carved in and at rest, which means he has identified his purpose likely and is very committed to it. And again, all you have to do is watch this man in real time and hear him talk to kind of know that he is attempting to walk the very thing that he is talking. So purpose lines are very strong. He's got the dimple here, okay, the divot in the chin, which he didn't have in his youth, but over time, that line, that marker showed up. Now, as I've said many times over in my videos, this is an attention marker, which means the person is designed to handle attention well. They can digest it well. They're sort of built to take attention. And once again, RFK, being a lawyer, now running for president, doing the things that he's doing, these features are congruent with who and what he is at a fundamental level. And these features I like seeing in a politician. I do. It's like, okay, you've got the metrics to handle attention well. You've got some yin, you've got some joy lines, you've got some good wood. Wood is very dominant in the political sphere. So these things coming together. And then lastly, his mouth is pretty earthy. It's not overly huge, but it's pretty full. And again, this is the marker for generosity. This is a marker for compassion, empathy. It's about the 5 senses too. So his mouth is pretty strong. And, if you look at RFK, especially in his youth, there's a picture here. He's got a nice, full, plump mouth. That, it definitely ties to his pleasure seeking. He is a recovering addict. I can't remember if it was alcohol and drugs or one or the other, but he definitely battled, really had some difficult drug challenges early in his life. Interestingly enough, with that broad forehead, we see an open-minded approach to it too. He also sat with psychedelics, and he's also used that to kind of integrate and get a better perspective. So RFK has got a lot going on in his face, and his eyes and the way his shen presents too is definitely, when we see wood and water, you have to think in the 5-element cycle. Water promotes wood. And because he has a blending of those energies, there's a certain amount of strength in those 2 dominant elements, which means the wood is going to be fed and hydrated really well, which also means wood people, when they have this wood energy coming through the face, they're not always well received. Wood energy is sometimes hard to digest, and RFK has been very forthright with the things that he is pro on and what he is, against. And, it definitely is interesting because he polls really well, except for in the boomer generation. And a lot of the boomer generation really dislikes RFK. They see him as a quack. They see him as a kook. They see him as a crazy conspiracy person, which is really interesting because when they've done the commensurate parallel polls with that too, the vast majority of boomers watch legacy media. They're not getting to see the long-form conversations with RFK where he's going into nuanced topics and nuanced talking points within like a 2 or 3 hour podcast. That is a very different platform, but the boomer generation does not watch that. They're watching MSNBC, ABC. Now, this is not me defending him and saying, he's not crazy. That's really up to you. You have to decide and looking at people and this kind of thing. But that is something to think about in terms of how well he's received. And there's a little bit of there's an intensity with RFK in terms of how he's received into the world. And that wood energy definitely makes it a bit harder. The last piece I'll touch on here is his public persona, natural face, and inner persona. Now, please keep in mind, it was very difficult to find RFK's face stoic, still, frontal with no shadows. This was the best I could do. And so please take it with a grain of salt because shadows really do change the look, whether you like to admit it or not. This is why they have uplighting in scary movies or downlighting when bodybuilders are doing something. Lighting changes the tone. So he's got some shadows on both sides, which are not my favorite in terms of doing this. So I really want you to do your best to look at the proportions, look at the spacing and the ratios. So his inner persona has got closer set eyes. There is a bit more of a militaristic kind of, drill sergeant energy. When we see those close set eyes, There's a capacity to be very critical, and critical in detail, critical in thought, critical of people, just critical in general. Critical, the nature of criticality, if that's a word, is not a bad thing. It's just how you wield it and how you direct it. But his inner persona does run that way. So that's something to pay attention to, and it looks like he does run that way. He is very critical of big food, big pharma. He's got some serious issues with these, big entities. His public persona is definitely a bit more that rounded out, soft politician look, right? There's something kind of open and accessible about him and how his face sits on the public persona side. For what it's worth, RFK here has a legitimate politician face, especially that public persona. That is a face of kind of like a textbook political face. Like, it really does. Across the board, all the things I've talked about, he's definitely got them. So that's all I've got for RFK Jr. If you've got questions down below, please let me know. And to just kind of wrap this up, last little talking point here is, in reading his face, it's not just me about affirming like this is how he is and this is how you can see it in his features. If he were my lifestyle client, if he was working with me one-on-one on face reading, a lot of the metrics I would be asking about, like, are you doing this? Are you doing this? Are you doing this? He would be saying yes to. He's a public figure, so I can track what he's doing. But his facial features are congruent with the political and the lawyering terrain that he has chosen. Like, his face fits for that thing. Now, if he was doing something completely opposite of this and something that was counter to these features, that's where the life nourishment metrics are diminished, and that's where it's a problem. So again, when we're reading a person's face, you're looking for like, yeah, here are the features, here's the congruency, right? Here's what the feature says, and here's how they actually are, it appears to be in the public sphere. But this is a good thing because it nourishes life. You have to be the thing that your face carries. The elements you have, the features you have, that has to be reflected in the external. You can't get away from yin-yang theory. As above, so below. That which is in must come out. Internal, external, hard and soft, night and day, all of that. So that's all I got for RFK Jr. If you got questions, comments below, please put them in the comment box. Thanks for your time.